Okay, we're going to learn about the 6 trig ratios, and a lot of people recommend thinking about Soh-Cah-Toa. And let me show you what that means. So the the S stands for the sine of theta, is equal to O meaning the opposite side, H meaning the hypotenuse side. So that's the SO. The cosine, is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Toa is opposite side over the adjacent side. And remember, a ratio is a fraction. It's how one thing relates to the other. And then the reciprocal sign is called cosecant, but look at, if this is opposite over hypotenuse, the reciprocal is hypotenuse over opposite. Adjacent over opposite, hypotenuse over adjacent, tangent to cotangent. Those ratios are reciprocals of each other. Okay, so this is all what that means. So right now we're going to focus on 30, 60, 90, or 45, 45, 45. And when we say what is the sine of an angle, so imagine that this thing right here is your eyeball. Wow, I just botched that eyeball. You just gotten an injury, evidently. From the viewpoint, from looking at this angle, the angle across from it is the opposite side. The adjacent is always touching the right angle and touching the angle that you're looking at or looking through. So this is the adjacent side, and the hypotenuse is always across, always. The hypotenuse is always across from the 90-degree angle. So sometimes it's helpful if you write that first. And now look at what the ratio says. Sine is the ratio that's formed when we take the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. So if we said sine of 30 degrees is the opposite side over the hypotenuse, well, we would have 1/2 divided by 1. Well, 1/2 divided by 1 is 1/2. So that's the sine ratio. Now, from that angle viewpoint, if we did cosine, let me erase this. If we did, what is the cosine from the viewpoint of the 30-degree angle? Well, cosine, so if we come up here, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So we're going to take the adjacent side and put it over the hypotenuse side. Well, remember, the hypotenuse side is just 1. So whatever the adjacent side is, √3/2, that will be the cosine of 30 degrees. Remember, it's all from the viewpoint of this 30 degrees. √3 divided by 2 is √3 divided by 2 divided by 1 doesn't change its value, so it's just √3/2. Now, tangent is a little bit trickier. So remember, tangent is the TOA. So if we come back up here, TOA, the tangent is the opposite side over the adjacent side. And so a lot of math professors or high school math teachers encourage students to memorize the tangent of the different angles. Because remember, TOA is tangent opposite over adjacent. Well, from the viewpoint of this angle right here, the opposite side is 1/2. The adjacent side is √3/2. Well, when you've got a fraction over a fraction and the bottom denominators stay the same. You can kind of ignore them because when you multiply by the reciprocal, those are going to cancel. And what that leaves is tangent of the 30 degrees is 1 over root 3. Now, some professors will allow that, but typically you can't have a radical in the denominator, so you'd have to multiply top and bottom by root 3. And so that means the tangent of 30 degrees, the numerator is root 3, but root 3 times root 3 would be root 9, and the square root of 9 is 3. And the recommendation is, instead of doing this division each time, those of you who can memorize pretty easily, to remember the tangent of 30, 60, 45, and do it that way. So remember, it's always the viewpoint from the angle. So if we come down here, and now we're the viewpoint of a 45, 90 degree angle, well, here's the opposite, here's the adjacent, this is always the hypotenuse. So the sine of 45, well, notice the adjacent and the opposite side are the same, therefore the sine and the cosine values will be the same. For sine, it's opposite 2 over 2 over 1, but if it's over 1, we can ignore it. And then cosine of 45 is this adjacent root 2 over 2 over the hypotenuse 1, so we can ignore the 1, root 2 over 2. And then tangent, remember, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Well, those two numbers are the same. So anytime you divide a non-zero number by itself, 0 divided 0 is not 1. So any non-zero number divided by itself is equal to 1. And all the way around the unit circle, so if we look at the unit circle this way, for tangent, since this is positive, positive, this is negative, negative, this is when those values will be positive. So tangent of 45 will be 1 in this quadrant and 1 in this quadrant, but negative in this quadrant, negative in this quadrant. We'll come back to that a little bit later. I probably jumped the gun a little bit on that one. Probably going, what is she talking about? All right. So then when we come down here to the 60, 30, 90, this has just been flipped. So now from the viewpoint of the 60 degree angle, our sine of 60 degrees is going to be the same as cosine of 30 degrees because it's root 3 over 2. And our cosine of 60 degrees will be the same as sine of 30 degrees because look up here. Up here, sine of 30 is 1/2 over 1. Down here, cosine of 30 is 1/2 over 1. And then tangent of 60, well, on the 30, 60, we had 1/2 over root 3 over 2. Now it's going to be the reverse of that. It's going to be opposite root 3 over 2 over 1/2. And now look at the two denominators cancel each other out. If we did multiply by the reciprocal, the 2's would cancel, and that would just leave root 3 over 1 or root 3. All right. So those are special triangles, Soh-Cah-Toa, and what that means from the viewpoint of the angle in which you're talking.